Now, with a cost cap, we're not thinking that, you know, there's great risk that costs are going to be out of comfort zone for most voters and most ratepayers. But we wanted to assure ourselves that we could reasonably expect to achieve the 25% by 2025 with this cost cap. And we've done a fair amount of modeling, both DTE and consumers. We've shown this to them. I'm not saying that they would agree with us completely, but they haven't said that we're completely wrong either. And I'll let Chuck speak to DTE's analysis for himself. This is based on information from the company's filings with the Commission and sort of reasonable projections about what might happen. We're taking account of fuel price forecasts. Natural gas obviously plays here. We are talking about the period really beyond 2016. The forward options for natural gas are now in the $5 range, so they're higher than now. That's the sort of pricing that we've assumed in doing our analysis. Many of the company's current assets are going to have to be replaced because they're old, or replaced or refurbished because they're old and need that. And when you do replace old capital with new capital, there's inflation in between that drives rates up. And then there are new EPA regulations on conventional generation, and we try to account for that. On the renewables side, you all know that costs have been changing pretty rapidly for at least wind and solar, not so much for biomass and hydro. Based on Michigan's resources and current costs, we would expect this mostly to be wind. I would say if we got to 25%, my personal forecast would be that it would be about 20% wind and the other 5% a mix of mostly the existing biomass and hydro and some solar. Solar doesn't really come in our forecast until about 2020, thereabouts. Based on its declining cost, it should become competitive in some applications around that time. So with that kind of mix, we used current costs for these technologies to forecast the cost of doing the renewable version of this. And it's dominated by the wind costs, of course. So we're not assuming in our forecast, I should say, we took the costs from the current contracts, the ones that were reported this morning. If the production tax credit goes away, which we think it will at this point, that obviously raises those costs, but the technology is continuing to improve. We think in this period, 2016 and out, assuming current cost supply is probably conservative in the sense of being high rather than low. The technology improvements should overcome the loss of the credits. So with that, we did a forecast, and there are two lines here. Just want to be clear about that. Two lines. One red and one blue. The blue one is our forecast of DTE's rates, average rates to final customers from now out to 2030. Under current policy, 10% by 2015, EPA regulations, that sort of thing. The blue line is behind the red line, which is our forecast of what the rates will be if this is adopted. And as you can see, they're not very much different. And that is the point. We don't think that this is a big cost factor either way. Now, out in the end, if you look carefully, you start to see the red line a little bit below the blue, and that's because of the fixed price of the renewables starting to counter the increasing price of fuel out in the later years. Framed in terms of the cost cap, the blue line is the difference in the rates in our forecast under this policy and without this policy as a percentage of what the rates would have been. The red line across the top is the 1% cap. and we think we come in well below it. There certainly are scenarios in terms of future prices of things where we could hit the cost cap. So we're not saying we're 100% sure we stand at the cost cap. If we do hit the cost cap and have to delay, those of us who are proponents of this are willing to live with it. One of our motives for this proposal is to create jobs. The cost of renewables, not identical, but roughly competitive with cost of generation from fuel-based sources. So in some sense, what we're saying is we want to substitute manufacturing and construction costs for these fuel-less alternatives for the purchase of fuel from out of state. And out of that, we get jobs. We get operations and maintenance jobs that scale up as we get more and more installed capacity. We have construction jobs, which is that middle band, and I'm assuming sort of even build out for purposes of this presentation. And then we will capture some manufacturing jobs. Certainly there will be imported, both from out of country and from other states, manufactured products go into these facilities, but we will capture some of it here in Michigan, and we think this represents the share that we will get. So we wind up with sort of 52,000 job years over the decade involved here. And we pay for that by avoiding some of the costs of importing coal. This is the total bill for coal every year. We're not sparing all of that. I'm not claiming, we're avoiding the whole 1.8 billion, but we will use less coal. Now, some people not as familiar as you with our resources and the technology wonder if we can achieve this. In 2008, when we started on the current policy, this is the wind map we were looking at. This is from NREL. And our best wind is in these pink areas. So that's where we've been building. We've got a little one up here for Stony Corners. We've got a little bit over here by Muskegon, Lenawee County, a little in the southwest. Here's Gratiot County. So, those are the obvious areas where the build has been occurring. Since then, the technology's changed. We now build larger towers. We have turbines tailored for lower wind conditions. And the map looks more like this with the technology that you would go out and buy today. Presumably, it will get yet better. The color code is the same in terms of wind speed, and so you can see we have lots of decent quality wind opportunities in the state. Our estimate is that if you take high quality land-based wind resources at 100 meters, we require about 6% of that in order to meet 25% by 2025. So this should be doable. And doable without doing projects in a lot of places that don't want them. Now, obviously siting needs to be done and done well. Communities have to be worked with. I know we have a mixed record, but we have some very successful projects. And we hope that, we'll learn those lessons and do them right. The pace of build here is, if you think about it, 15% of load over 10 years, so 1.5% per year. We're currently building out at about 2% per year. So the pace is a little bit slower than what we're doing now. The utilities have old capacity I referred to earlier. It has to be replaced. That's on the order of 2% per year, so it leaves room for a mixture of gas and renewables to replace old coal capacity. And we stop at 25%, not just because it alliterates with 2025, but also because it's, if you look at the studies that have been done and what the grid can support with current practices for load balancing, 25% should be well within that capability. We have Ludington, in addition, which could mean Michigan could do better than that, but we aren't trying to push it. And then finally, we've done some modeling of the load duration curves and the optimum mix of generation if you subtract wind from the load with actual data, and this still looks doable to us. So we stopped at 25% because we thought it was reachable with current technology and grid balancing practices. So that's my brief presentation of the proposal. We'll let you do your side of it, and then we'll take questions.